Okay, hello everybody. I am so excited to host my first ever office hours session live here. So the rule is basically come, ask me your questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. And even if you don't have questions, this is a really good opportunity to learn because whenever I've been in classes at business school or continuing education, I've always learned so much from what other people have asked. So I can already see that we've got a few people joining. This person is debating between doing an MBA or studying a degree in computer science. I mean, first of all, if those are your options, if your options are, shall I do an MBA or shall I do a degree in computer science, then I'm just going to congratulate you because clearly you've done very well in life if like those are your options. And that they are different, but not hugely so. So for example, excuse me, when I was at Chicago Booth, that's known to be a very, very quantitative school. And you can actually go and kind of hide yourself in mathematics and a lot of programming and data science if you go to a really, really quantitative school. So if that floats your boat, you're not going to learn necessarily that much coding. You'll learn some, but you're definitely not going to be a proficient coder. But you will get to exercise your maths brain and still learn about business. So it's more about what are you interested in? What do you want to do? Do you see yourself in future becoming a chief technology officer? Or do you see yourself in future becoming a chief executive officer? If you want the CEO route, then the MBA is going to be a better option. If you are more interested in the CTO route, then computer science is what you need to do. But I just want you to know that both in computer science degrees and in MBAs, I have seen the same pattern. Obviously, I've only done an MBA. I don't intend to study a computer science degree, although I've done some courses in it. Basically, business and technology, they change so quickly that when you learn to use a particular tool, like a lot of my computer science graduate friends, they complain that, the stuff that they learned in year 1 is already out of date by year 4, by the time that they graduate. And that is a frequent complaint of computer science grads. However, what you need to think about is systems thinking. So all my engineering friends, I know a few people who, for example, did engineering at Stanford. They're not necessarily engineers now, but maybe they're computer scientists or venture capitalists. And what those engineering degrees gave them is kind of first principles thinking. And you can get first principles thinking from a computer science degree and from some business schools. So again, it's more about learning frameworks rather than using a specific tool. So then the question comes back to, who do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to go down the CTO route, in that case, computer science all the way, or the CEO route, which is MBA all the way? Okay, hope that helps. I can see we've got another question. Okay, I'm just going to read this. I would love to know what your perspective is on the difference between being a product manager for a tech versus non-tech product or service. Okay, so this is a really good question. So in my experience, in tech companies, they would want product managers to have more of a technical background and sometimes actually be a coder who becomes a product manager. Whereas in a non-technical company, they are often more interested in you as a product manager having a really deep understanding of your customers and of your user base. So I'll give you 2 examples of 2 specific jobs in 2 specific companies to illustrate this point. So let's start with a tech company, Google. So Google started hiring product managers. They were basically the first company to hire product managers en masse. And essentially what they saw was that, okay, they had all of these engineers roaming around without much supervision in the early days of Google. They had this whole thing about like not believing in management. That's another story. Anyway, at some point, it all just got a bit chaotic and crazy. And so they were like, okay, we need some sort of management interface with clients. We need some sort of businessy person, not just a bunch of engineers. And then they're like, okay, product managers, that's what we're going to need. And essentially, in Google, the product managers were former developers, so basically developers who had learned this new skill set. And in general, to be a product manager in Google, you have to be really proficient in technology. Often these people are people who study computer science at university, or people who have actually done quite a lot of coding, who then transfer into PM. And so, for example, I remember if we then go further into deep tech, let's continue on the Google theme. I remember I met a product manager at DeepMind, and DeepMind, that is the deepest tech bit of Google. It's remember, it's that AI that basically beat a Go player. Anyway, it's basically super smart AI. And I met the product manager from there, and he literally had a PhD in computer science, and then he became a product manager. So that is like probably as technical as you can get, but also for a product manager, but also in a company that is literally a truly deep tech company. So it makes sense in that environment, because then in that environment, that super technical product manager is going to be liaising with customers, but also super technical. So for example, like that's not a job that I could do. And that's a job, like if I were to try to learn that job, I would literally have to get a couple of degrees, and it would take me a really, really long time. So I'm not going to do that. Then let's look at another scenario. And this is actually somebody who was a Non-Techies guy. And I did an episode with her on the Non-Techies podcast. I'll tell you all about this. So this lady, she was called Juliet Icing. And she used to be a journalist at the Telegraph newspaper, which is one of the biggest newspapers in the UK. And then basically she ended up transitioning into product management at the Telegraph. If you want to learn how she did it, it is one of the earlier episodes on the Non-Techies podcast. But essentially, she was not a technical person. She was a journalist, literally like a reporter chasing news stories, right? That is actually like the opposite of a coder. But if you think about it, like in any newspaper, in any media organization, like whether reporters and editors, they need their own app so they could upload stories. And basically, when you're a product manager, you really need to understand who your customer base is. So in this case, when Juliet wanted to transition from being a journalist to being a product manager, she needed to learn some stuff about tech. She actually took the Tech Put on Technical Founders course at Non-Techies. Even though she had no intention of being a founder, she just wanted to think from that perspective. And so she had to learn about technology, but her greatest kind of winning point for the product management team was that they were all a bunch of product managers, none of them had ever been a journalist. And there was this person who had been a journalist who's going to make products for journalists. So in her case, it was much easier to learn a bit of tech stuff and then to bring her perspective as a journalist. And so she worked at the Telegraph Group as a product manager for years. And now she is a senior product manager at the News Corporation. So clearly did very well there. So basically, that's the biggest difference. In the tech companies, product managers often have tech backgrounds, not always, because in Facebook, in Meta, they're often more commercial. It depends which bit you're in. But basically, the more deep tech it is, the more technical expertise the product managers need to have. When it is not deep tech, say it's a language learning app, and I know a few product managers at language learning apps, they usually come from the perspective like they know education, they know language learning, or they know how to work with corporate clients. So again, non-technical, but they understand the audience. Hope that helps. Okay. If you've been listening to the podcast, you probably already know, or if you've been to my webinars, you guys know that I spent $180,000 on my MBA from Chicago Booth. $180,000, that could be like a down payment on a very nice house. But, I chose to invest it in this, right, in my brain. Would you be listening to me if I didn't? I don't know. So listen, I think my MBA was one of the best investments I have ever made in my career. But as I always say, an MBA is not the be all and end all. And a lot of MBAs right now, they really don't teach you this kind of enough skills for the digital age because, and I learned this the hard way. Basically, the world of business moves really, really fast. Like commerce, innovation, especially the tech sector or digital transformation, this world moves super, super fast. So you've got this like one world moving really, really, really quickly. Like think about how quickly did the business world adapt during the pandemic? Like the way jobs shifted, the way we work with customers, like the business world is working really, really, really quickly. Now let's look at the world of academia. When you think of academia, do you think like, oh yeah, academia, that's a super fast-paced environment where like things are changing all the time? Like, no, Oxford University, they've been around for centuries, like the University of Chicago. I've lectured at both of those places and I love them, they're fantastic, but they're not exactly the most dynamic in terms of like how their curriculum changes or who is teaching there. And then you think about tenure. Literally, in the US, you have tenured professors. Basically, those are professors who cannot get fired. You literally cannot fire them. So how do you think people behave when you can't fire them? Like, is there that much impetus for them to be super innovative? Like, yeah, if their character is a character of an innovator, like I think I'll always keep on inventing new stuff, whether somebody pays me or not, because I like it. But that's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are like, hey, I can sit here, play video games, get paid and do nothing. Fine for me. So basically what I want you to see from this example is that on one side, you have the business world that is moving really, really fast, especially when it involves technology. And on the other side, you have the academic world, which basically moves really, really slowly. And a lot of the time doesn't even have the incentive to change because the people who are the most senior literally cannot get fired. What position does this leave MBA students in? It means that a lot of what's taught in business schools hasn't really been updated for literally decades. And so, Michael Porter was writing about his 5 forces. I'm going to say that again. Michael Porter was writing about his 5 forces about, 20, 30 years ago. And, it's still good. It's still relevant to some extent, but it's not the only strategy book that you need to read. And this is why I always say to people, like, I think an MBA is a really, really good investment, but a lot of the time, an MBA is incomplete. Like it doesn't give you everything for the business world as it is now, because a lot of the time you're not really going to learn about digital transformation. You are not like, if you are going to learn about something, if you're going to learn about technology, a lot of the time those courses are like, oh, let's teach you a bit of data science. And like, that's useful, like that's better than nothing. But honestly, as a business leader, what you need to know is not necessarily how to like actually do the data science yourself, not how to write the code yourself, but like, how do you hire a data scientist? When you have hired a data scientist, how do you set them the right tasks? Because like, I remember I needed to hire a data scientist for my last company, and I didn't really understand what the difference was between like a data scientist and an analyst. And I accidentally ended up hiring this company that basically said that they were going to do data science, but actually what they did was just like some basic spreadsheet analysis. And they charged me like a data scientist would. And I didn't know any better. And so I ended up paying them this money. And then like I got this report and I was like, hang on a second, like I could have done this with my spreadsheet skills. What the hell? And so that kind of holistic knowledge of what does a business leader need to know about tech, most of the time at business schools, unless I'm teaching there or unless it's Stanford, most of the time it's basically not going to be there. So to conclude, if you want to do an MBA, go for it. My advice is usually go to the top schools, because essentially it's about the network and the brand recognition. That's really what you pay for. Yes, being told by a Nobel Prize winner, it's great. You could also listen to a Nobel Prize winner on like TED or Coursera, and read their books and all of that stuff. Really, the top schools charge top dollar because they give you that brand recognition and they give you that network. And that network is what has allowed me to build Tech for Non-Techies into a successful company. Because most of my clients right now are University of Chicago graduates. And like, that's literally where most of the revenue comes from, because there's this kind of recognition of like, oh, you got an MBA from Chicago Booth. Okay, like we don't necessarily know you specifically, but like if you went here, that means you're a smart person. Like, let's see if we can work together. And then as a result of that, people who respect the University of Chicago then ended up being like, oh, okay, well, maybe we were from Harvard or maybe we're from INSEAD, but like we respect the University of Chicago, so let's go and become part of Tech for Non-Techies. So literally that is what has happened with me. If I didn't have that brand recognition and I had all of the same knowledge that I have, I don't think getting my first clients on board would have been that easy, because basically that's that strength of the brand. It allows you to get your first clients, and then you can have success stories, you can do advertising, you can do all sorts of things. So if you have that option, go to the top tier MBA, but just know that that's probably not going to teach you that much about technology, so you'll need to get those skills elsewhere. I just graduated from Booth like you. Congratulations! With 18 years in the automotive industry. Oh my God, that is awesome. What do you think are the next steps to pivot correctly into a more tech industry on top of taking your classes? Well, so yes, of course, my classes are fantastic, but you're right that taking classes is not enough. And this next bit is super important for people who are not just for people who are super studious, right? So if you're super studious, and Chicago Booth people are super studious, there is this tendency to take course after course after course. And people, I sell courses. So clearly I am very interested in you taking courses. But that is not that, like, if all you ever do is just take courses, that is not going to be enough. You actually need to get involved in projects where what you are learning is being implemented. And so think about like when you were right at the beginning of your career and you literally had no experience, because this is kind of where you are now. When you want to transition into a new sector, you don't have experience in that sector. You don't, and like the tech sector or companies that have really, really wanted digital transformation, they are fundamentally different. They're philosophically different from companies that are not. So it's a bit like you're starting from scratch, which basically means you need experience to get experience. And how do you do that? How did you do that when you were in the early stages of your career? Well, I'll tell you how I did it. I was a free intern. I was an unpaid intern right at the beginning of my career, because that's basically what allowed me to get experience to then have to get an actual paid job. Now, I'm not telling you Chicago Booth MBA with 18 years work experience to basically quit everything and become a full-time intern, which is like what I was doing when I was 18. That's not what you need to do. What you need to do instead is, and I always see this, volunteer your time with some sort of technology startup or tech startup accelerator or somewhere in the tech ecosystem. Volunteer your time there, maybe become an advisor. Right at the beginning, becoming an advisor is probably going to be unlikely. So like literally just give them your time, maybe help an accelerator organize some events. Maybe if you want to get into like if you want to get into something like automotive tech, so basically what's happening, what Tesla's doing, like self-driving cars, there are lots and lots of accelerators and there are lots of angel networks that are interested in that sector. Then what can you do? What kind of expertise can you offer them at the beginning for free as an organizer or an advisor? So I'll start doing that. That basically means that you're making that transition, eventually you'll start doing something and it's really, really working. And the startup or the accelerator on the angel network, they're really valuing you, but you basically haven't got anything for it yet. So at that point, when they're really valuing you, you can say, hey, can we make this kind of official? Can you make me into an advisor? Or can you say that I'm part of the screening committee here at this angel network? And they will say yes. And at that point, you basically go and you put that on your LinkedIn. And that is going to be kind of your first victory. Like you're not just a person who's been in this traditional business management role, you are now transferring into digital leadership. So actually, I'm in the south of France and it's getting very hot. So at Non-Techies, what we do is we have courses where you learn, the core language of technology. But in our coaching program, we also basically work with you to make sure that you get involved in tech projects or tech startups or tech accelerators. Because if you learn to speak tech, but you don't get involved, and you then don't tell the world about your involvement and you don't work to change how people see you, all of those tech courses are not going to get you very far. What are the trends you're observing in the tech space which you're excited about? I'm particularly interested in health tech and what worries you about the tech sector and how it's evolving. First of all, it's going to be really obvious. I'm going to go with AI because if I don't mention AI as a trend, it would be just weird in the world that we're in today. But I think everybody understands that AI is a trend. But kind of going a bit further than just saying the bleeding obvious. I think there is this interesting conversation of how can we really use generative AI, because there is this technology, but it is very, very far from perfect. So for example, chat, I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you want to laugh, go on ChatGPT and ask it who you are. Literally, I went on ChatGPT and I asked it, who is Sophia Matveeva? And it gave me this bio of myself, which is 50% nonsense. It was 50% right, but 50% it just made up. The bio was great. I was very impressed by the fake me, but it was definitely the fake me. And this is called hallucination. And so generative AI, it often hallucinates, and computer scientists haven't yet figured this problem out. But yeah, generative AI is also really, really useful. So given the fact that it can be super useful, but it can also make things up, how can we generally put this thing to use? And so that discussion, that trend, that's something I'm really, really interested in. How do we actually use this thing, which is effective, but very far from perfect? And another thing that I'm interested in is the legal implications of this. So on Sunday, I'm going to the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, which is basically the Oscars of the advertising industry. And, what marketing agencies, what brands, what they're worried about is okay, with generative AI, it all comes from data from somewhere. But imagine if somebody used Taylor Swift's music as part of their sample to make generative AI. Would Taylor Swift be happy that her music was essentially sampled to go into an AI generated track? No, she would be dreadfully unhappy and she would sue the hell out of you. And I would be totally with her because you shouldn't do that. She's the artist. She came up with something amazing. It's hers. It shouldn't be used without permission and payment. And so this is another trend that I'm really interested in is, okay, how do we update the legal system, especially rights and copyright? And because essentially for generative AI, you need data, but that data usually belongs to somebody. So I'm really curious about what's going to happen there. I'm excited about it, but also I do think that there are going to be a lot of really, really interesting lawsuits. And okay. Also, another trend that I'm seeing in the tech industry, which is a little bit less obvious, is the emphasis on design and the emphasis on user experience design. So there are now more and more CEOs of tech companies that actually were not coders first, but they were designers first. So look at Airbnb. Brian Chesky was a designer. He went to the Stanford School of Design. Evan Spiegel went to the Stanford School of Design. I forgot where Brian Chesky went, but he was a designer. And there are a few other tech CEOs that were designers first. And if you actually look at the role of a designer in a lot of tech companies, that role is now really, really elevated. And some companies even have the chief design officer literally sitting in the C-suite. And this is a fairly new thing. And I think it's because in some cases, the technology, that's not where their competition is. That's not where the differentiator is. The differentiator is in making something easy and delightful to use, because that's what drives people to use it. And this is where design in technology is becoming ever more important. And so I always say to people like, okay, if you're not interested in becoming a coder, but user experience design really thrills you, then actually you could have a role, you could kind of get to the C-suite through that, which is not something that I would have said like even 5 years ago. And finally, okay, the next bit I'm going to say, you might think is really boring, but I think it's very exciting. So this whole thing of like traditional corporates going through digital transformation, that has been happening for a really, really long time. And, you know, according to McKinsey, 70% of digital transformations fail to meet their goals. Okay, but companies are still going through digital transformation. Like if you're a large company and you don't have a digital transformation program, it basically means you're going out of business. Like that's it. And so I am excited about essentially a lot of the low-hanging fruit that is still yet to come. Because I think, you know, right at the beginning, we talked about AI and generative AI, and that's the cutting edge of tech. The cutting edge of tech is really, really important. But there's like so much basic stuff that just hasn't been done. Like to the point, I don't know if any of you have ever used the British Airways app, but I unfortunately had to use it to take my flight from London to France on Monday. And it was just, it was horrendous. I don't know who made it, but it was so bad. And I remember thinking like, you don't need cutting edge tech innovation. You just need this stuff to work. And so I think, you know, British Airways is a massive company. And so I think there's like, I'm actually quite excited about the digital transformation and what's to come in these like, in these low-hanging fruit, which have not yet been picked. Okay, we're going to be wrapping up soon. Okay, I am just looking at the final questions. All right, awesome. Well, I have loved speaking to you. Thank you very much. What we are going to do is so next week I'm going to be at the Cannes Lions, which I'll tell you all about when I'm back. And then after that, we're going to have a class on power in the digital age. And I'm going to teach you some case studies that I got from my own life and from the life of my clients, essentially about how to have a successful career, but also to achieve power as a business person in the digital age. And the reason why, I've been really thinking about this. The reason why I think this word power is really important is that when people don't understand technology and when people don't understand what a technologist, like a data scientist or a CTO, when they don't understand what that person is saying to them, even somebody who's in senior management, even somebody who actually has, a very successful career, even if that person controls a big budget and like they're the SVP of a massive company, that person can feel powerless. And what do we do when we feel powerless? We basically give up our own agency, and then we're like, oh yeah, whatever the tech person said, like that sounds right, and then we kind of nod along smartly. And like sometimes you can get away with it because sometimes generally that other person, they are getting everything right. But like a lot of the time, completely acquiescing and like getting rid of your responsibility, that is not a good idea. That's probably not going to get you very far. That's why I'm determined that to be a successful business person in the digital age, you'll need to understand technology. But as I was saying, Nabeen, rather, sorry, it's not just about taking tech courses after tech courses. It is about learning how to own your knowledge, make sure that people know about your knowledge. Because a lot of the time, if you're just sitting there and you're studying, and people don't know about your new skills, and you haven't built that network, and you haven't changed your image, you haven't changed your reputation from just being a traditional business person to a digital leader, you're not going to have those interesting, powerful careers. So Power in the Digital Age, that's coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be free. So basically, you should definitely come. Awesome. You are super great, and I have loved talking to you, and have a wonderful day/evening. Bye, everybody.